Welcome back to Call Time with Katie Birenboim. I'm so excited today for our second special episode focusing on a particular play or musical. We had such a great response to the last one that I simply had to continue with this series. And one of my favorite comments that I received on the last one about Guys and Dolls was about how wonderful it was to hear someone talk about something whatever it is, that they truly and unabashedly love. And for that reason, the focus of my second special episode was a no-brainer, and that would be Jeff Bowen and Hunter Bell's title of show. Now, this may seem like a big departure time-wise and style-wise from Guys and Dolls, and in many ways I did that purposefully. In some ways it could seem like it's the anti-Guys and Dolls. It's contemporary, written in 2004, featuring only 4 actors, and as those actors famously sing, there's virtually no set or costumes in a traditional sense. It's just 4 chairs and a keyboard. It's also the ultimate postmodern meta musical, which I will definitely talk about later, because it's literally about the writing of a musical, It's as meta as it gets. Whereas Guys and Dolls relies, as we discussed last time, on pretty much as traditional and conventional a book and plot as one can get. On the other hand, there are some surprising similarities that I've been thinking about between title of show and Guys and Dolls. First and foremost, it's infectious humor. You may be able to tell that when it comes to shows that hold a special place in my heart, it happens to be mostly comedies, musical comedies. And both of them present an abiding love for the stage and its storied history. It's a little more blatant in title of show, which we're also going to talk about, but I think there's a thread in Guys and Dolls as well that connects them. So before we move on and discuss title of show in depth, let me give a little background on the show itself. Title of show was birthed when the New York Musical Theater Festival, otherwise known as NYMF, rest in peace, requested submissions for its inaugural season in the spring of 2004. Musical theater composers, writers, actors, and most importantly, longtime friends, Hunter Bell and Jeff Bowen, decided to enter with just 3 weeks to write and compose a first draft. Nonetheless, they were determined to write an original musical rather than one based on a movie, book, or even a play. And according to theatrical lore, as they were drafting and brainstorming, they found that their brainstorming sessions were much funnier and more unique and fresh than any of the other ideas they were having. Thus, the genius premise, a musical about 2 guys writing a musical about 2 guys writing a musical, was born. They enlisted their other theater friends, Susan Blackwell, originally Stasha Hernandez, and eventually Heidi Blickenstaff to perform. Larry Pressgrove to orchestrate and music direct, also plays something of a fun cameo in the show. Michael Barese to direct, and the show soon premiered at NYMF in September 2004. And these short performances set off a chain of growing theater adulation and success. In many ways, the title of show story is the dream trajectory of a small unknown musical. They then workshopped at the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center at Ars Nova and eventually premiered at the Vineyard Theater off Broadway. And the coolest part was that the show continued to change, grow, and evolve as its star rose and as it went to different theaters and venues. It added songs like Festival Medley to reflect the goings-on at NYMF, and What Kind of Girl Is She to reflect some initial tension between Blackwell and Blickenstaff. Eventually, the show opened on Broadway at the Lyceum Theatre in July 2008, and since then it's been performed in London, Denmark, Hong Kong, the Edinburgh Fringe, which I just talked about with Catherine Cohen, my guest, regional theaters all over the country, and in colleges, schools, and camps, a fact to which I will surely return on this show. So, in our discussion of title of show, I want to focus on 3 different threads. First, as I mentioned, the postmodern meta musical of it all. As I mentioned, it's a show about 2 guys writing a musical about 2 guys writing a musical. I can't emphasize enough how fresh that was at the time. Of Of course, musical theater had tackled the meta before, notably in shows like Into the Woods, where all hell breaks loose in the second act, and the characters not only notice their narrator, but eventually kill him. Or in a, sorry for the spoiler alert, or in a show like The Drowsy Chaperone, where most of the characters are fictional actors of the past, essentially figments of the man in chair's imagination. And of course, there are countless examples of the show within a show frame. Kiss Me Kate, Chorus Line, The Producers, Babes in Arms, to name a few. But title of the show was the first to go, in my view, full Waiting for Godot-esque meta. And that was huge, especially because, in my view, there's an inherent meta-ness to theater itself that we may not always think about as bringing this other layer to the action. The actors are playing characters, but they're also aware of who they are as people, as actors, and of being watched by an audience who is in turn aware of the actors watching them in turn. But no one acknowledges these weird layers because of the presence of what's known as the fourth wall. And here we're getting into some real performance studies stuff, but I think it's really important to remember when talking about title of show. Other artistic media like painting, sculpture, poetry, and fiction had been dealing with this level of the meta since the early 20th century. But I think it was harder to do with theater, particularly musical theater, because there's already such a suspension of disbelief that we're working with, and because the fourth wall has to be so emphasized. You know, in Oklahoma, we already have to suspend our disbelief in order to acknowledge that these townspeople, these random Oklahoma people, are just breaking out into song. And I think that makes the meta more difficult to achieve in musical theater. And you can see title of shows meta-ness first in its endless supply of in-jokes. In fact, there's an entire New York Times guide to the in-jokes, which was published in 2008 after its Broadway debut. And there are so many of them. Some of my favorites include Mary Stout getting run over by a hot dog stand, the concept of anyone putting Paris Hilton in the apple tree, Gristides, the entire Playbills and Monkeys song, Thanking Jesus in Your Bio, all references to Mamie Duncan Gibbs, voicemails from theater celebrities like Sutton Foster, Marin Mazzie, Carrie Butler, Emily Skinner, and eventually Patti LuPone. But you can also see this meta-ness in its elasticity. As I mentioned, title of show changed and evolved as its star rose and as it played different theaters and venues. As I mentioned, it added these different songs to reflect what else was happening in their lives. Obviously, each of these versions had to freeze at a certain point, but despite that, watching the show feels like you're watching a work in progress, like you're watching the magical process of artistic creation happen before your very eyes. And as I've previously discussed on Call Time, one of the great and distinctive joys of live theater is this sense that at any given night, something could be different. It's why, as we've discussed, audiences love and actors love when an actor messes up or flubs a line. And in title of show, you get that sort of magical kineticness automatically. You get the feeling that you're watching the creation of and the development of art rather than just sort of stale regurgitation. There's basically no fourth wall in sight. The actors make you feel as if you are there with Jeff and Hunter as they stop listening to Henry Sweet Henry and watching internet porn to start their musical. You feel like you're there as Susan confides about her suspicion of Heidi, the new cast member, but also eats a diner pickle. You're there as tensions mount as the actors do a photo shoot, presumably for something like Playbill.com. It's so meta. It reaches such a level of meta-ness, the talking about the maybe Duncan Gibbs, the pickle, the sort of downtime on stage. There are a lot of jokes about downtime, the sitting in silence, that in many ways it feels like a Seinfeld episode put on stage. And I'd argue that in many ways it was the first musical to do so in such a daring and such a fresh and such a truly meta fashion. And I think that is something pretty incredible. The second thread I want to explore is the way that title of show honestly and authentically represents the struggle of making it in any capacity in the business that is theater. At the start of the show, Jeff and Hunter, who of course are the writers of the show, but also the main characters in the show, remember, a musical about two guys writing a musical about two guys writing a musical. So they work in theater, but they don't yet feel a part of it all. In fact, they imagine that only with this, the creation of their musical, their original musical specifically, can they truly join the theater community. They sing a whole song about it at the top of the show called Part of It All. And I think Christopher Isherwood said it beautifully in his review of the 2008 Broadway version. If title of show has a purpose larger than mere diversion, he wrote, it is to expose the obstacles, internal and external, that artists on the fringes of the business claw past every day to keep their aim true and their egos from imploding. I've been thinking about that a lot since I reread that quote when I was doing research for this. And I think it's one of the best distillations that we have for the struggle that many of us face as we're trying to make it in this business, not just from external forces, not just from the casting directors, not just from the agents and the other actors, but also really importantly from ourselves internally, as Isherwood says. In fact, Susan Blackwell's triumphant song in title of show is all about this. It's called Die Vampire Die. And in it, she describes the different doubters or obstacles that you'll face every day as an artist, especially as an artist creating new material. And she equates these obstacles with vampires. First, she says there are the pygmy vampires who swarm around you like gnats with thoughts like, your teeth need whitening. A thought I had just the other day. How does everyone get their teeth so white? Who knows? Then there are the air freshener vampires who don't want you to write, as she says, about real life things like blood, betrayal, or oral sex. I actually don't know if I can say this on YouTube. We'll see. For my Catherine Cohen episode, I was like going deep through the YouTube guidelines, but we'll see. And then thirdly, the worst of them all, in her view, the vampire of despair, who will wake you up at 4 a.m. to say things like, you look like a fool, or no matter how hard you try, you'll never be good enough. And I have never in my life, in all of the art I've consumed, books, movies, TV, self-help books, anything, found such a perfect distillation of the internal obstacles we artists face and the way our work product can become indelibly connected to our sense of self and our sense of self-worth. More on that. I've always loved, probably most in the show, and identified with the song A Way Back to Then in title of show. And it's a big reason why I wanted to focus on the show for this one. And I loved it even before I had worked a single day or made a single dollar in the professional theater business. To me, it captures, even with just the title, the way that actors and artists could spend their entire professional careers attempting to find a way back to then. And I understand a way back to then to mean a way back to the way theater felt for them as kids, or art generally, the way it felt when they first fell in love with it, when it wasn't complicated, when it wasn't connected to money or dating or self-worth or Instagram followers. But the best part about the song for me, it offers this vision of hope that you can return to then. And the way you do that is through an opportunity with the craziest of company having a kick-ass time. And honestly, I found it's as simple as that. What Bowen, Bell, Blackwell, and Blickenstaff all understood with title of show and with this song specifically is that all it takes to bring us back to then, to the time when theater was for theater's sake, when it was just about how good it made you feel and how good it made other people feel in turn, is the right project at the right time with the right people, free of all the trappings of the business and free of the ego. that brings me to my very special guest and the last thread of title of show that I want to discuss today. And that thread is friendship and the importance of special relationships with your peers on stage. And that may sound treacly or corny, but I think it's really important. And as I'll discuss with my guest, makes doing title of show unique, I think, for a lot of shows, because it's one of those, well, we're going to get into this, but it's one of those shows where I think I would argue that you need close friendships. I know it's called acting, but we're going to investigate that anyway. So without further ado, the wonderful, the toe-touching singer turned lawyer, Alan Hernandez. Welcome to Call Time. I'm so happy you're here.
I'm very happy to be here. I'm excited to chit chat about a very important shared experience we had.
Absolutely. First of all, for the viewers, give me a sense of where you are right now.
So where I am, I'm in a conference room in my apartment building in the city of New Orleans, where I just moved a few days ago. I'm from Louisiana, but I've never lived in New Orleans. And so I'm in like move territory. Like an hour ago, I was in an Uber XL on the way home from Lowe's carrying an 8x10 rug. Like that's, you know what I mean? That's kind of the phase of life that we're in right now.
But why are you specifically in the conference room?
Oh, why I'm in the conference room is because given that the move was recent and we have to set up all of our utilities and whatever. Long story short, we don't have Wi-Fi in my apartment. And that was a realization I came to just this morning. And so this was a last minute compromise and it's working so far.
So
I won't speak too soon, but so far so good. Yeah, we're getting Wi-Fi on Thursday for people who are worried about it. Today is Tuesday, so 2 days from now I'll have Wi-Fi.
You'll have sweet Wi-Fi
if all goes according to plan.
I think it'll be fine. I think the Call Time viewers will hold you in their hearts and prayers.
Yeah, please hold space for me and my Wi-Fi installation. Thank you.
Exactly. Alan, do you want to give a little bit of background for our viewers about who you are and what you are doing in life at the moment?
In life, yeah, I'm a recent law school graduate. I'm 1 week out of law school. Very recent, 1 week out of law school. Like I said, just moved to New Orleans. I don't know what I want to do long term, but I have 2 years of clerking for federal judges before I have to, well, not before I have to make decisions, but before I move on to something else. I may stay here. I may go to New York. I keep throwing Houston around. It's going to be what it's going to be. Yeah, who knows?
Big American city.
Yeah. Oh, well, the idea is that's the biggest like legal market in the area. If I wanted to stay in the South, that would be the sort of idea of Houston. It would be like New York, but not New York. It's very much not New York. I won't even entertain that comparison. But anyway, that's me. I don't do theater anymore. Not formally. And by that I mean that in law school I was the director of our parody musical.
The director?
Yeah. Hell yeah, I was the director.
Well, how did I not know that?
We're co-director. We were a group of 3. I mean, you know, no one takes it on entirely themselves. Normally, either 2 or 3 directors. So, but you know, it's all the people who do this kind of thing are people who like did college theater or like high school theater, and now are in law school. So presumably don't work in professional theater, but they still want to do it. I don't know what theater, like how I'm going to scratch my theater itch, like moving forward.
Trial lawyer.
Yeah, maybe just be a trial lawyer.
Give them the old
all lost theater.
Yeah,
give them the razzle dazzle, right? Yeah, or just do podcasts about title of show.
Oh well,
about my experience doing a college production of title of show.
Well, after this, you're going to be raking in the offers. You're going to have to get management, separate podcast management.
Correct. Yeah, put me on Spotify.
Well, excellent segue, Alan. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I'm always.
You can tell he's a director because he's turning the wheels and
how do we get from A to B? Yeah.
Exactly. I wanted to bring you on the show specifically because the third thread of title of show that I'm going to talk about, I'm talking about its sort of meta-ness and the way that it represents how people on sort of the fringes of the business of theater have to scrape by, how it's sort of a struggle until you find the right project. And then lastly, friendship and how important it is to the show. And that's why you were the perfect person that came to mind. For those, I should explain, Alan and I did a production of title of show together in college. I never thought I'd be shouting this organization out on the internet, but shout out to PUP, Princeton University Players. So I want to take you back first. Give me a snapshot of your life when we started to do Title of Show. Had you heard of it before? Why were you interested in doing it, etc.?
Yeah, I had not heard of it. So I didn't do high school theater at all. I got to college and it was sort of everywhere, and so I was like, well, this seems like I'm happy to be on stage. I like being in front of people. So I started doing musicals. Katie and I, we first met in the Princeton Triangle Club, and that was kind of my primary extracurricular. Ran for president and lost. And
you were going to bring up the busmate scandal of 2015.
I basically had a political scandal and lost, which to say nothing. I was beat by someone who deserved it and is great. So it's all good. But Triangle was kind of our primary sort of affiliation, the foundation of our friendship. But so going into our senior year of college, so this would have been 2015. I had never heard of it, but our friend Luke, who also was in the Triangle Club, was announced that he was directing the show or whatever. It was part of the season for the coming year. It was going to be early in the year, so our schedule was sort of funny because we auditioned in the late spring. We had one rehearsal, as I recall, before the summer.
Did we?
We had one single vocal rehearsal for the opening number, which I still, by the way, have. I can send it to you. I have the voice recording, like the voice memo on my phone. Wow. At that rehearsal, and then we broke for the summer, and then we came back, and we had Triangle obligations. We had the Frost Week show, which is our orientation week show, and but we started Title Show rehearsals, and it was really fast. It was definitely the quickest college musical I ever did. I don't know if you did a fast one. I mean, it was. I just looked at the poster, and it went up on October 8th, and
like a month, maybe even a little less than a month.
A month, and we probably didn't use those early weeks. It was fast, and I remember the time being like, this was really quick. But what was so cool about it, I mean, since you've framed it as the friendship thing, is that it's only a 4-person cast, and the 4 of us were already very much friends. There were sort of no new friendships formed, no meeting of anyone. It was just a sort of a fortification, so to speak, of existing friendships. Manny and I, which Manny played Jeff and I played Hunter, right? Yeah, I think that was who was who. They're a little bit, no offense to sort of the show's makers, but less distinct than Heidi and Susan.
I agree. I remember, I too remember that we got cast in the spring before we broke the summer. And I think I have a distinct memory when I got to the first rehearsal in the fall, I thought you were playing Jeff and Manny was playing Hunter.
Right. I had to sort of think. I remember Jeff is the music and lyrics guy, and Hunter wrote the book. I also learned that from the poster that I just looked back at. And I remember Manny's character was the songwriter guy. But yeah, so we did that, and it was really fast. And it was, I mean, as someone who is not in like the industry, and like it was never even like a kind of insider, even in college when I was more involved, I hate sort of, an organic process. I hate playing in the room. I hate I like to come in and be taught what needs to happen. Maybe there can be a little back and forth, but I'm not looking to engage in the creative process. This was that. It was like ground up. We were, choreographing, if you can call it that, but like was blocking ourselves, coming up with ideas. And it actually was fun. I mean, this is basically the only context in which I actually appreciated doing that kind of thing, because it was a group of us who were having fun with Luke, our friend, who is also the director. And because the show necessarily lends itself to that. Like, because it is a show about making a show, obviously we weren't engaged in the project of writing it, of course, but we could engage in our own mini project of staging it and choreographing it and so on. So it was, like I said, basically the only time I ever liked that kind of thing, of being myself responsible. I mean, truly responsible. I mean, we were, again, no offense to Luke, but it's like coming up with what we were doing. And it was fun. And I think we got compliments on some of our staging choices.
We did,
if I recall, from Hans Kriefall.
Hans Kriefall, a previous guest on Call Time with Katie.
A previous guest.
This brings up 2 huge questions I was going to ask. The first being, as you said, we were all friends already, which in many ways mirrors, obviously, Jeff and Hunter started writing it, and then they were like, let's just get our friends to do the show, which I think presents a sort of interesting catch-22. And I'm curious how you feel about this. Do you think it's maybe even necessary to be close with the people that you're doing the show with in order to pull it off in the way it's supposed to be?
Yeah, that's interesting. I have to imagine that you, at the very least, you can't pull off this show if you don't get along with the people. I mean, which is probably true of a lot of shows, but I think specifically because of the size and because of the nature of the show, you can't get away with anything kind of adversarial in the real life relationships among the people. Definitely the ideal scenario has to be what we had, which is that you are friends. I think you all have to care about it. Like the way I described kind of my approach to college theater, which was showing up, being taught something, having fun, and having a good time performing. I think in a vacuum, that is probably not quite enough. Like you have to actually believe in the project of this show, which I came to believe in. Whether it's because I didn't have close friends in it or because I had other commitments or for any number of reasons, I was not excited about being in it and about doing this particular type of thing, then I think it doesn't work, because then all the kind of organic stuff I was saying, the process as it existed, I think falls on its face. I mean, yeah, it's got to be important that there be some. I would say that during the process, it's probably adequate if you become friends over the if you're strangers and you become friends. That's its own narrative that probably produces something interesting. But whatever we had, I think, worked
is the
for what it's worth.
For sure. No, I think you're right. Obviously, in any show, it's nice to be friends with your cast,
right?
But I think a lot of shows, especially more traditional shows, for whatever reason, like if you're doing, The Drowsy Chaperone and you're a professional actor, it's your job and you can just sort of like show up for work and maybe you like coworkers and maybe you don't, and you do the show and you're done. And it's funny you say you never liked, I'm the same way. I don't really like organic play in the room stuff. And I've never really liked cast icebreakers in that way too, like forced bonding. Like I think bonding should happen on its own. But I imagine if we had not known each other, I definitely think in order to do a successful title of show, you would need some of that.
And I do think a lot of it, but not all of it, is purely a function of size. Like I never did a show smaller than this. Like I've never done it, last of my dream is obviously the last 5 years, but I've never done a show that small. To me, yeah, it would be a huge impediment to be in that tiny cast, especially because the show, like you said, in Drowsy Chaperone, you got a big kind of ensemble cast. Maybe you don't cross paths with particular people, or maybe you do and it doesn't matter. There's no real chemistry that's important to the show. This show hinges on, it's a tiny group of 4 people, and and I think the show, I don't remember the book very well at this point, but like attempt to establish individual moments between every permutation of the character. So like there's no room, even plot wise, so to speak, within the world of the show for disconnects between any pair of people. And so that probably requires some real life comfort. We take our shirts off. There's constant banter about each other. I mean, it's like designed to be intimate among the 4 of them.
It feels like
it, and it has to be, yeah. And the show has to be very boring otherwise. Like I think without those elements executed well, you've probably got it, because it's a stripped down show, just the piano. I mean, there's nothing left. Right, exactly. And so I think about that, you're probably in boring territory. So I'd say it's critical.
The other thing you mentioned, which I think
I've got traffic.
Do you think they've seen title of show?
Did you want me to ask? Oh. You know what I sing more than anything is Monkeys and Playbills, while I'm taking you off track. Monkeys and Playbills is my number one. Yeah. I agree.
Okay. What I was going to ask, though, you brought up something that I think is also crucial, which is sort of a scrappiness about title of show that feels inherent to the process. And something I was thinking about, I don't know if you remember this, even my memories are hazy, but I think after the show closed, we had to perform Die Vampire
No,
Die.
Katie, obviously I remember this. I was thinking about it today. Yeah, Die Vampire Die.
Can you explain
At like a
what?
fundraiser, at like a, yeah, we got asked. So Princeton put on this. It was a benefit concert. It was, I think, it was some fundraiser event, and every student performing group got to perform. That works well when you're like a dance company, or I don't know that acapella was involved, but you're a music group. You're something that can that has kind of one product, and you
Yeah.
can sort of pull one out of a hat and put it on. They got the Princeton University Players, which is PUP you mentioned earlier, to fill out a slot. But PUP is a musical theater group that has like a season with 1 million shows, and no, it doesn't have any membership apart from, say, like its officer board or whatever. So we got tapped because I think we were the most recent show,
Right.
or maybe because we were a better fit, but I think it's because it was in the fall.
Yeah.
And no one else was like rehearsed. Like we had gone up in October.
Say like, hey, this show that's happening in February, can you come do this show? Yeah.
Correct. Like they hadn't rehearsed at all. So it was, they got us to do it, and we did Die Vampire Die, which is, I mean, all of these songs are like really tethered to the world of the show that makes them like tough to pull out. At least the group numbers. You could maybe do A Way Back to Then. There are some that maybe could lose context and still survive. Die Vampire Die, I think it is maybe the most removed from the world in terms of the group numbers. You obviously can't perform the opening number. Point is, we did Die Vampire Die. It was so confusing. We were kind of like under rehearsed because, like you said, we had finished the show. And I remember, I mean, we might be projecting. No, I don't know that we talked to anyone. But the audience was like not vibing with it. Like they like did not have a good time. What I'm also remembering as I talk about this is that it was like a talent show. It was a contest. And we lost. We did not, like, there was like a first, second, and third place, and we like came in third place.
I also remember the reason it felt so scrappy too is like they were like, all right, do this number. It was obviously in an entirely different theater. And I think
we had performed in a black box effectively.
It was a huge, were we at Richardson? Like, where were we?
No, it was like it's like where like the orchestra sometimes performs. I'd only ever been in that auditorium one time. It's sprawling, got these big wooden sort of panels in the back. I mean, it's a huge space. It's made for like an orchestra, and we were, or at the very least, like a piano concert type of thing. Yeah. And we were up there, the four of us, like running around being like, that was me doing my vampire crucifix thing.
I just remember like looking into the audience at faces that were just like,
what's going on? I mean, you have to be fair. I mean, as someone who likes title of the show, Die Vampire Die is like in fact, before I knew the show, speaking of not knowing it before we did it, I saw someone perform it. I think either like in some sort of solo rendition or something not staged quite like the show, but in like a Bakifa concert or some sort of benefit, something like in a cabaret setting. And I remember seeing it and being like, it's perfectly fine. Like, what is this song? What's going on? And so I can only imagine in the context of some sort of variety show where you're singing like dance numbers and other things, these like four kids get up there and sing like Die Vampire Die. I mean, it's just like totally weird. So yeah, a hilarious memory.
All of that is to say, and I think, as you said, like we were doing a lot of like playing in the room together, and because it was student directed and student produced, it was sort of the bare minimum, which I think is as the show is sort of meant to be. But it's an interesting catch-22 there too, because it feels like because it's so scrappy, it feels like it could be better suited to school or community theater environments. But then on the other hand, which I'm so curious for your opinion about, it's like the most inside baseball musical there is. Like, how can you understand it if you're not in the New York theater? And I'm curious for your perspective on like that balance.
Look, there is a tension there for sure. Probably the college musical theater setting is the best fit because you might capture insider kids who know what's going on, but who also limited rehearsal time, limited resources, and that type of thing. Us, but for me, for a guy from Louisiana who didn't know anything about musical theater, and even I think all of us, I mean, there's also maybe kind of a generational gap. A lot of you far and away out of the four of us knew the most references. But even I knew, even for you, it was like, look, we looked up a lot of stuff. I had no idea what was coming out of my mouth at any given time. I mean, the dialogue in particular is loaded with, who knows? Who do we mispronounce?
We mispronounce someone?
Yeah, I had a line. I don't remember who it was. I had a line about like, I want to move to New York. I want to meet, or not move to New York. I want to something. I want to meet X person. And Glenn Pinella, our Triangle director, told me after the show, he said, you pronounced that person's name wrong. Like, that's literally the wrong. So it's just like I was so out of the loop. Like, I did not, a lot of it I looked up, a lot of it I learned a little more. We eventually saw the Golden Apple with Lindsay Mendez, right? In New York after the fact. So I came to know what the Golden Apple was, but like Monkeys and Playbills, the list of musicals, never heard of it. I mean, a single one of them basically. And then, like I said, the dialogue. So it's tough. And the audience, surely you cannot count on to know what the hell you're saying. They didn't. They have to just trust that you're making references that are like funny to them. And that might be enough. It might be enough to know that the people you're watching are having fun. But certainly we didn't know what we were talking about.
Yeah, it's sort of like the friendship thing. Like, sort of the entire show kind of feels like you're watching an inside joke that you're not really part of in some ways. And it can be exciting for some people to feel like, oh, I get this reference, I'm part of it. Or like, I'm friends with those people too, I'm part of their friendship. Or it could feel like this extended inside joke that you're not a part of. And I wonder for like, I think for some people that's fun and exciting, and for others it may cause them to feel standoffish about the show. So all of that said, I'm curious, like, I get the sense you decided to do the show because like a bunch of us were auditioning and Luke was directing. So you were sort of like, why not? What were your initial impressions of it? And was there a moment that you can pinpoint where you were like, oh, I think I get it now and I'm obsessed?
Yeah, I think definitely the way, I mostly did it because it was fun. I recall there being like a solid amount of hype about it. I think it's a show that a lot of like theater, I don't mean hype like everyone was itching to see it, but I mean like within the sort of college theater community, it was like, oh, people know title of the show. I mean, not included, but people knew about it. I think in its day, right, was like pretty popular, kind of had like a cultish following. And I remember understanding, I mean, the title obviously announces this fact about it, but the self-referential aspect of it, I found to be very entertaining from the get-go. I thought that was just like very funny. I remember popping on the music, maybe either before I auditioned or after I got cast, and being like, okay, this is really funny. And so the kind of inside baseball aspect of it really wasn't revealed to me until the rehearsal process. And frankly, until, again, it's concentrated in the dialogue. I probably didn't get wise to it until we really started rehearsing scenes, at which point I had to say, I don't know what we're saying. But so I was into it very early on, all that to say, because I just thought, what if this dialogue were set to music? Just the sort of self-conscious building of it was really, really funny. I thought, Hunter or Jeff, I forget who corrects who, but I think Jeff correcting Hunter about how he pronounces a word such that the rhyme works, theater. I was just like massively entertained by all of that. And then you add on top of it that we were all friends hanging out. And it was just like I'm prepared to say like the most fun production I think I did in college. Kind of far and away.
With the chairs?
Huh?
It wasn't no.
Oh no. I did a lot. Let's just say I did a lot of shows in college.
Do you have a favorite number?
So my favorite
general and favorite number to perform, I would say.
To perform. Right. Favorite number to perform was I'm going to do a tie, which is kind of a cop out. There's not that many songs, so I'm going to account for a lot of them. Favorite number to perform at the time was definitely Two Nobodies in New York and Part of It All. The two kind of main Jeff and Hunter songs. Manny played, I think it says earlier, Manny played Jeff. Manny was also one of my best friends, is one of my best friends standing in my wedding. He was my roommate at the time. We had performed together in the Triangle context. And so it was it's on the real life friendship front. It was just like, he was the guy to play this part for, if you take as an assumption that I'm playing Hunter. And so doing those with him, again, Two Nobodies in New York is one of the most self-referential songs in the show. I just had a blast doing those. We worked on the harmonies a lot. I mean, we just had so much fun doing this. To listen to Well, then I guess I'll just give some honorable mentions because I'm not performing. One of them is A Way Back to Then, which I love. It is not obviously a Hunter song. I didn't perform it, but I think it's like so much fun. It's a kind of it's like pretty short. It's kind of song that I like will be on the subway, or when I lived in New York would like be on the subway and just sort of like look it up and put it on and like let it make me happy for like 2.5 minutes and then move on with my life. So I love that song. And then the one that I would probably say is my like kind of, I say it's honorable mention. I think it's actually the grand champion that kind of transcends category for me is Monkeys and Playbills, because the lyrics are total gibberish to me, but performing it was super fun because of the back and forth pairs. Doing that was very fun. And then of course I recall in college, the harmonies are the most fun. I think it's the biggest sort of 4-part thing that happens in the whole show. And I remember when we did it, it was the one that we would, when the 4 of us are off, not at rehearsal, elsewhere on campus, we would just sort of start with like, soon after there, you just like start in the middle of the song and sing the harmonies. And like, we would always like kind of fuck up and like whatever. And it was just very fun. So anyway, all that to say, Monkeys and Playbills, total chaos, very fun to learn. And it's like rewarding to pull it off because it's like hard and chaotic. Like when you do it, it's cool. But I love all the music.
All the music is so good. I'm really glad you brought up the harmonies and just the show musically, because I think it can be easy to dismiss the show as sort of just a concept or just sort of glorified sketch comedy. Which I think it does have a foot in sketch, which is why so many people from Triangle came into it and could like master that really easily. But on the other hand, the music is so fun and so good. And talk about a challenge, especially in an educational setting, because you're always in really tight harmonies. I obviously had a nice fine time because I was always on the top. But like I remember Abby would like have to learn those alto parts and just like drill them, and then once they were perfect, it was just the best. And I think people discount that.
Yeah, Manny and I, again, we are roommates. Oh, totally. It's I think I discounted it. I think you're right that like the show's concept heaviness tends to sort of occupy the majority of people's brains. But it's not to say that it's like Sondheim difficult, but it's not easy, especially if like I'm not a trained singer at all. And so I kind of by my senior year had gotten used to following along on sheet music, and I could memorize effectively and try to reproduce.
Of baritones around you, you can sort
doing
of
it. No, right. You're alone on your line. I would say, yeah, in terms of the rehearsing and drilling, Manny and I would kind of practice together sometimes. Like, we would just kind of sit there and say, oh, is that, and because it was not intuitive, and yeah, you don't have a chorus of people on your voice part, like helping you out. And the other thing is you're totally exposed. It's only the keyboard. And we performed in a tiny room. Like there's no getting away with, faking. You can't fake it at all. It is really the point. So it was tough. When you earlier said that it could be a good fit for people, community theater or people with like lower, time commitments, my reaction is like, yeah, except the music is hard because you got to be able to pull that off unless you simplify the whole thing and you cut harmonies, in which case you don't have much left. But yeah, it was a challenge for sure.
Yeah, I think about there's a line, I forget which song it's in. Someone is like, I'm getting worried our show is a little donuts for dinner. And
yeah, donuts for dinner.
And they're like, like you think it's a good idea, and then 3 hours later you're hungrier for something more. And I think a lot of people do dismiss title of show as a bit donuts for dinner, but I think it's,
well, that's the fact that line is even in the show speaks to, I think, its genius, because it says we're preempting your critique, audience. We're announcing to you that we know what you might say, and we're either we share in the anxiety, but we also are going to rebut it. That happens, like midway through the show. That's Hunter's line, I think.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, I think it's Hunter's line talking to Susan. Speaking of the vignettes of various pairs together, that's a Hunter and Susan moment where he says he's worried about eating donuts for dinner. But yeah, exactly. It's like, it could be that, but I think it's not. It's also, it doesn't run that long. I think it totally pulls it off. And the music definitely, I think, doesn't get the credit it deserves.
I'm glad we brought up Hunter specifically. I know you were saying earlier that the distinctions between Hunter and Jeff are a little less distinctive than perhaps Susan and Heidi. Did you have a favorite thing about playing Hunter specifically, though? Like, did you come to see that there were things about Hunter specifically that you resonated with?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't remember why. I can't tell you why I was cast as Hunter and Manny as Jeff. It might have been a vocal reason, but their part, for the most part, you could kind of swap their two lines and nobody would know better. And in fact, I think we did do that. So um, I don't really remember. I in fact remember being a little counterintuitive, at least for our personalities, because Hunter, as I recall, at least based on the plain text, is a little more whimsical, maybe a little more carefree. He's not, I don't want to say as like by the book, but he's not the one, for example, going around correcting people. Whereas Jeff is a little more neurotic. He says, no, you have to do it this way. You have to do it that way. And Hunter's like, whatever, I don't care. Hunter breaks out in the Tony Award song. He's just like, yeah, he cares about the rules a little bit less, which is kind of the opposite of me. I would be, and in fact, me and Manny, our relationship and our friendship was sort of the opposite. Like he is more go with the flow than I am. And if you were to ask me who in the Hunter Jeff duo am I mean, I could be overstating these sort of buckets, but if my recollection is correct that Jeff was the rule guy, that's Alan more so. I think than Manny, and at least I'm more Jeff than I am Hunter. So yeah, I don't remember much about Hunter other than thinking like, yeah, I would never do this like totally crazy silly thing. Like I would remember I would hit my mark and I would do XYZ perfectly because I'm, neurotic.
But I think that's part of the beauty too, which is that interesting duality that we started out our conversation talking about, how because title of show is so meta and because so often you're doing it with friends, it can feel kind of like I, Katie, am performing this show. I, Katie,
Yeah.
am performing this show with my friends Manny, Alan, Abby, and Mark Fishman, who played Larry.
Shout out to Mark.
Larry.
Yeah.
But it is still acting and it is still a show. So I think that's the interesting
Right.
thing there about you and Manny, because not always, but I think sometimes it's easier to play something that is very different than your personality rather than something close to your personality. So like it
Right.
could have, maybe it was cool for you to, because I know that Hunter gets to do,
Yeah, it was.
which is like one of my favorite numbers in the show.
Yeah, original. See, and it's funny. I recall being like the most nervous about original musical because it's not. I don't know. I don't know what it is about it.
It's conceptual and it requires like a voice and
Yeah, requiring the voice. I mean, and sort of like game wise, it's Hunter getting up in front of Jeff and like trying to like get him interested. I think inspire him with something, and kind of clown effectively. And that is which I ended up going on to play Cosmo and Sing in the Rain, as you know, later that year. And even that, I think for a similar reason, that's not really my personality. Like clowning and not saying I'm like boring, but like I don't know, like doing this to someone with like a bunch of humor is not, I don't know, it's not exactly me. So that actually was the biggest challenge, kind of for the same reasons. I would have been better off performing like a pay attention to me, do the right thing sort of number, than hey, you need to have fun and be inspired. So it was a challenge, but yeah, I don't think, it's not to say that it was bad casting. I think for for you with Heidi, it was always like check, 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 check. I mean, we would laugh about how spot on everything she said. All of the Heidi bits were like, that's Katie, 100%. And so I think there are multiple ways to do it. I think it's not that Hunter is the opposite of me in any way, but leaving that room for some acting, for some suspension of my own personal identity, I think is, it's a valuable part. It's part of every single show, including this one, which tries to kind of narrow that gap, but I think still leaves some necessarily, except in your case. No, I'm kidding. You acted for sure.
I think that is like the trick of the show, because it straddles that line in its concept of it's a show about two guys writing a musical about two guys writing a musical about two guys writing a musical. So it can kind of feel like, am I acting? Like what is happening here? But I think that's sort of the beauty of it. You mentioned that you would sometimes listen to like Way Back to Then on the subway. So I'm curious whether you, and to what extent you return to title of show in your everyday life today, and do you feel like, in the vein that we were talking about, how you didn't really know any of the references, you're from Louisiana, not part of the like New York insular theater community, did you feel in some ways inducted into that community because of the show?
Yeah, I think definitely to a degree. I think kind of learning that there was an insular community, that there
Yeah.
is a space in which like a show that is this dense with references, obscure references, a show like that, the fact that it can find an audience is sort of news to me, right? The fact that there's a critical mass of listeners. And that's not to say that everyone who's a fan of the show understands all the references. Obviously, that's not true. But to know that like even they, as kind of types, Hunter and Jeff and Heidi and Susan, exist. Hearing you talk and Hans talk, it kind of intersected with my personal reality, and I think maybe added color to the sort of New York theater people who I knew, in the sense that I learned that there's this sort of hobby, this interest, this profession, whatever theater might be, goes a lot deeper than, I like guys and dolls. There's so much to learn. To say whether I felt inducted, I'd say I learned something. I still would feel very much on the outside of it. But having performed the show, having said with my mouth these lines about people I've never heard of, yeah, there's something of an induction there, I would say. And now, do I return a title of the show? I mean, I definitely like on my own, like organically put on the soundtrack within the last probably 6 months, I would say. Which is pretty, as someone who like doesn't listen to like put on music very often, sometimes I'll just crave like a musical theater soundtrack and go all the way through. And my library is somewhat limited because I don't know everything in the canon.
Last 5 years.
Yeah, it's last 5 years. Title of the show. Look, do I listen to Wicked sometimes? The answer is yes.
Sure.
We need to destigmatize Wicked, by the way.
As a culture, we need to destigmatize.
As a culture, we need to get enough. Talk about New York theater community. Enough with the Wicked bashing. Get over it. It's a good show.
It's a fantastic show. It's the first show I'm going to see when Broadway reopens.
Yeah, thank you very much. I've seen it. It's the only show I've seen twice. And also, by the way, while we're at it, freaking Legally Blonde. Enough with the bashing of Legally Blonde. It's an incredible musical with incredible music. I'm sorry. Anyway, that's just for the people who are like, you know the type. So anyway, I'll have to say that I do listen to Title Show occasionally. I think more than anything, the lasting impact has been, I mean, this is like so whatever, but the biggest impact has been in the form of a lasting memory for us. I mean, like you sent me photos the other day, like looking at photos of that, again, condensed, brief, sort of intense period for us. For me, it sort of represents college, embodies college friendships in a way that I'm very grateful for. And we should say probably that our director, Luke, within the past couple of months was a contestant on a Chinese reality show. I think we have to point that out just because it's a crazy fact.
No, it's crazy. It's a crazy fact.
It's a hilarious fact. Where are they now? Alan's in a conference room in New Orleans. Luke is on national television in China. I just had to say that while it's on my mind.
No, I'm so glad you cleared the air about that. Address the
elephant in the
room. Yeah, exactly. I also think that at this sort of like cuspy time in our lives, I just think there was something special about doing such a like friendship heavy show that's not just about friends, but as we said, like is dependent in order to like function on those bonds. That was really special. And I know also for me, as someone who was planning on moving into the insular New York theater community, it was kind of like a peek into my future in a fun way, which I also just want to note the other elephant in the room that I believe this summer before we did Title of Show, after you got cast, you lived in Hell's Kitchen with Dean. Yeah. Which is
correct.
Really crucial.
I think we were calling it Chelsea, but it was borderline Chelsea.
Oh, you were.
It was 30th. We were calling it Chelsea. It was 30th Street between 8th and 9th. So, do you want to call that Chelsea? I call it Penn Station. I also was attending tap classes at Steps on Broadway for preparation for my role as Cosmo in Singing in the Rain. So it was a very New York. It's the most New York theater summer I've ever had in my life, and I was listening to Title of Show on repeat because we were going to be doing it in the fall. I mean, it is associated both with our rehearsal and performance period in the early fall, but also with like my time in New York that summer.
When you think Title of Show, what are like the first words that come to your mind?
Well, I was going to say meta. You beat me to it earlier, and I laugh about meta because I had a college roommate who he would police people's use of the word meta. He said meta had become totally overused, which he's not wrong about this. Like people like anything that's like at all sort of interesting or like abstract in any way. People are like, that's so meta. So he was obsessed with being like, that's not what meta means. This is an example of something that actually is meta, and you're not wrong to call it that. And you already said scrappy. I mean, there's something, if I could come up with just sort of like a synonym so I don't steal your word, I would. But the idea that like the stakes are low, you know, and you're kind of just having fun. I mean, it's the only show I've ever done where it sort of felt like that, like kind of whatever happens. And that the format like lends itself to messing up. I mean, Manny and I were like just bombing lines live when we were performing.
Opening night when Manny...
Opening night, I was trying to feed Manny his line because it's just the two of us on stage, and it was some line he had to ask. It was again because Jeff was leading the conversation, saying, "What are the costumes? What are we going to do about XYZ?" And I remember and this had never happened, and you know, at that point, 3 years of college theater ultimately didn't happen in 4 years of college theater, with this one exception, which is that we were just sitting there in two chairs, and people are sort of in silence. And we're just like. Like, and I give him sort of like 5 or 10 seconds. And then I think I was like, yeah. And what did you want? Like the costumes, like whatever. But it's just tough because his line is literally the bringing up of that top. So he couldn't be like, oh yeah. And what are we going to do about and then me be like, oh, I haven't thought about costume. Like whatever the nature of the dialogue was, like it did not lend itself to me poking him. And so it was a total disaster. But all that to say that like, I actually do think this is the kind of show that kind of accommodates that. I mean, the audience, I think, I'll hope, want it to be, they could totally think it's part of it. And even if they don't, they can be kind of in on it. Like because the show so breaks down the fourth wall, they can laugh with you and not at you for bombing the line. I think at least that's what I've told myself, having debriefed on just the deafening silence at the beginning of the show, first 15 minutes of the show, us just being like,
Abby and I backstage sitting on rolling chairs being like,
yeah, right.
Each other. No, but those are great words. You don't necessarily have to come up with new ones. And the last
I literally took your two words.
The last thing, but you didn't say like friendship or something, which is...
No, that's I refuse. Yeah.
Good. Glad we're on the same page, even though that was sort of the theme of this conversation.
Like, I hate that idea.
Yeah, can't do that.
No, I'm kidding.
Very last question, I promise, is there, I know you said you sort of think of what you were saying as gibberish, and to many of us it was gibberish, but I also think, as we discussed, part of the joy is feeling in on the joke, and especially doing the show, learning the references to become in on the joke. So is there a reference in the show that you like just to this day find so funny?
That I find funny.
Well, I think about.
Yeah, there's one, and I forget sort of the details of it, but it became, I think, among the many inside jokes we had out of the show is the hot dog cart thing. But you're gonna have to remind me, what is it? I forget what it is.
It's the first scene of the show. And I think Hunter calls Jeff, or Jeff calls Hunter, and is like, did you hear Mary Stout got run over by a hot dog cart?
Mary Stout got run over by a hot dog cart, yeah.
And it's really
I mean, and again, that's the kind of line that's like, what does that mean at all?
Yeah, at all. Because also if you're not from New York, you're sort of like, what does it mean to be run over by a hot dog cart? And is it serious?
What is a hot dog cart? What is yeah. Right.
I should say
it's sort of, a hot dog cart could be anything from like a tiny, like a sort of tiny wagon to like a bus.
Yeah,
or like not a card at all.
Right. Mary Stout is A-okay.
There's a famous photo, I think, with real Jeff and real Hunter and Mary Stout and a hot
And a hot
Am I
dog.
making up that there's a hot
No,
and a hot dog? I think they're holding a hot dog. Yeah.
they're holding a hot dog. It must have been pressed for the show. I'll throw the.
Yeah, it looks like the photo looks like it's from some big event or something.
Yeah,
But yeah, Mary Stout in the hot dog cart. Now, even now, it's like I don't really know who Mary Stout is, but I know the reference from the show.
Well, thank you so much for coming and going down memory lane with me. Is there anything about the show that you feel like I'm missing that you want to mention?
No, I think you covered it all. I'm glad you reminded me of the dialogue gaffe, because that we completely we meaning Manny blanked on his line.
When I was looking back at photos to send to you of the time, there's one that I didn't send you that I remembered the context of, which was, I think during Tech Week. This speaks to the scrappiness of the experience too, and how fast it was. Because I feel like we didn't really like put the show together until Tech Week. And so I think during Tech Week, we got kicked out of Whitman Theater at like 11, but we still had like something to block. And so we went to the Tower computer room and like rehearsed this scene. And there's this, and I was like really pissed about it because I'm not a night person. And
yeah, well, this sounds miserable. I mean, whatever it is.
There's a Snapchat that Abby Melick took where I'm like leaning back in this chair and my like foot is up on the table and I just look absolutely miserable.
Yeah, I kind of remember this, sitting in like those red chairs.
Yes, exactly. And it says like KB is really happy or something like that.
Yeah, I will say another memory, like you telling that story and sending those pictures, this was really, at least for me, like peak Snapchat time. And like no one's like, Frank, like I'm not on Snapchat anymore, but like this is like everything we were doing, we were snapping and sending to people. And I think it was before they had made Snapchat groups. So what you're doing is you're just like firing off photos. It was before, it had to be before Instagram stories. I mean, so the fact that everything is captured in Snapchat completely checks out.
Yes, and it also like dates it at a very specific time in our
life.
life.
And it's just the little the little gray captions and
Yes. And I also remember it was the height of Yik Yak. And I remember
I talked about Yik Yak the other day.
You did? In what context?
Yeah. It was toxic. I was telling a particular story about.
Horrible. Yeah. I mean, it was a horrible.
It was terrible.
But I do remember, like, so stupid, having a lot of fun being like, is everyone coming to the title of?
Yeah, we loved that joke. I found we did it for Triangle too. We were like, oh my God, like I hear like Katie B's like not marking like tonight at like Prospect Show. Like we were just like writing as if like our boring lives were like sensational news on Yik Yak, because you could like totally get away with it. No one else was doing that bit on Yik Yak. It was mostly like what the app was designed to do, which is like saying mean, gross stuff. But we were like tweeting about like the opening number of the Triangle Show. Yeah.
And the last thing I'll say, I promise, is that on that same token, we were so nerdy, but we also had this like release, like we felt like we owned the school in many ways. And I remember getting dinner with you at some point during the run in the Whitman dining hall before we went down to the Black Box. And we passed this like group of hot male athletes. And you were like, I dare you to go over there and invite them to the title of show. And
the title of show.
I'm gonna do it. And I like went
talk about not understanding their references. These like lacrosse guys.
Well, I'm pretty sure I went up to them and I was like, are you guys coming to title of show tonight? And they were like,
and they're like, what is that? I mean, we should say, maybe this is funny, maybe it's not. I think it fits with the scrappiness, is that like no one came to the show. It was, I have to say, like our friends came, but like it was not particularly well attended.
That's interesting. I may have blocked that out because my
choose not to remember.
Cancel it. All right. Thank you so much for joining me, Alan. Clearly, I can talk about theater and
we could go on for days.
For literal days, and I would love every second of it. Thank you so much. It was so fun.
Thanks for having me. Had a blast.
So there you have it. Thank you so much to my special guest, Alan, for talking with me about title of show. I hope you've gained a larger understanding of why the show is so important to me and why it's so important to so many in the theater community and beyond. I loved talking about the sort of postmodern meta aspects of it, as well as the importance of friendship and the bonds that you share on stage. It's really just the best. So we will not have a call time next week, but tune in the following week for a brand new regular old interview style episode. It's going to be really great. I have some incredible guests coming up this summer. I can't wait to connect with more of you, theater lovers and call time fans. So thank you so much.